All right, so I'm back. Last time we talked quickly about variables and data types and how all of them relate, and we kind of covered a little bit about concatenation, which is sort of a really sticky subject, or at least a confusing subject for some beginners, a great many beginners in fact, simply because this addition sign always feels like it should be math because we've been trained that way since we were kids, and using it for text data is really something that we have to learn how to get around. Um, it is a big part of coding because we're going to do some displaying of data a lot. As you're coding, you're going to want to output debug information to a special debugging programmer console in whatever application you happen to be running while you're testing your code. There's a lot of testing, small increment building going on as you go as well. You just sort of have to work your way through it. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to sort of delete all this stuff here. Actually, hold on a second. I just saw that I didn't save that properly. I'm going to save that as intro2.js, and then I'm going to delete all that stuff. I'm going to rename this to go intro3, and then I go file save as intro3.js. And I'm going to go up here to my script tag, and I can change that to intro3.js because I want it to refer to my intro3 file, and I just want my comment to reflect the correct name of the file. Now here, we're not dealing with variables, data, and naming conventions anymore. And I'm going to take off the introduction to JavaScript because it's kind of a long title. Instead, we're going to be covering operators and operations, essentially. So let's just call it operators. And we're going to be covering arithmetic operators as well as assignment operators. Okay, now what's the difference? Well, I'm going to wrap this into a function again, my function, because I think you and I both prefer it when the alerts come up as we ask for them, right? And for a little bit more variety in what we're doing, I'm also going to add two inputs here. Input type equals text this time, because we're going to ask the user to give us some information. ID equals number 1. And there's no onClick, and there is, let's just give it a value of arbitrary 11. And we're going to do a second one, and we're going to have number 2. And the value is going to be 21. And we're going to use these for, these BRs are just line breaks to space it out from top to bottom. So when I refresh, you should see there's our title again. And you can see that I have two fields. The 11 is the value from here. The 21 is the value from here. And I've just changed my mind. I don't really like it. I'm going to do that and make them empty values, and when I refresh they should be gone. Alright, when I click my button nothing happens because my function has nothing, but you remember over here my function is being called on click on the my button click, and I'm going to go over here, I'm going to say alert my button was clicked, whereas before it was my function was used. Yeah. Alright, so I refreshed, that's why you see that come up, and I click my button and it says my button was clicked just like we want it to, and so we know that it's calling the function correctly. Now something we're going to be doing throughout the course, which I think for the most part you're not going to have to do at least until a late chapter. It's going to be chapter 8. Chapter 7 and Chapter 8, that's when you'll start having to use this function for yourself, and you'll already have learned a whole bunch of other stuff, but I'm going to show you anyway. Var text box 1, or let's go number box 1, is equal to document, which is something that's built into the HTML window, dot get element by ID. And you see how it's 4 different words, and each word starts with a capital letter except for the first. That's a lowercase, so it's camel case right there. Alright, and I'm going to put in quotes. Now whenever you want to get a reference to a text box so that you can get information from it or put information into it, you call it by its ID. I like to copy and paste so I know that I've copied it or I have it exactly the same in both locations. So I've copied and pasted that one, and I go number box 2 equals, and I'm going to copy and paste that code, but I'm not going to use the same ID. Now I want to put that ID. So now I have a reference to the box of each number. But if I type in alert number box 1, what do you think I'm going to get? Well, your first instinct is that I'm going to get the value that I typed in there. So let's put in a value of 100. Actually, I have to refresh first. Then I have a value of, I guess it kept my value. Then I click my button, and it tells me object HTML input element. What the heck does that mean? Well, what it means is that it's giving me this whole object, and that's just a string representation of what it is. It actually has tons of information in it, like its position on the page, how it's positioned on the page, what colors are there, what borders are on it, and so on and so forth. But we're looking for one specific piece of information about this text box, and that specific piece of information is its value. To get that piece of information, we call the text box name, and then we add a dot value to it. So let's call our variable number 1 and say it's equal to the number box 1, because that's the text box, but we're getting the value property. To get a property, you just put a dot after the name of something and it gets the property of it. Simple as that. Alright, so now I'm going to put in, instead of number box 1, I'm putting in number 1. And when I save that and refresh, now I have a 100 in number 1, and I click my button and up comes 100 because I grabbed the value of the text box. Okay, moving on. I know that my number 1 is getting the right value because I used an alert to talk back to me as I was coding. I want to do the same thing with number 2. Number box 2 dot value, and I'm going to go alert number 2. I'm going to press F5, and that's my refresh button on the browser. I click OK on my title screen so we know we're there. I have 100 there. Let's put 200 here. Alright, so I have a number 100 in the number 1 variable. That's the first alert that came up. Number 2, that's the second alert that's going to come up. Let's find out what's in there. It's 200. I've done that correctly. So I've grabbed the value of the reference to number box 2. So from the object number box 2, I've grabbed the value. Now I know that I have those correct and I don't need those alerts anymore, but maybe I'll need them later. So I'm just going to comment them out and I'm going to put the word debug. That kind of tells me that this is debugging code and it's not important for the program to work, but I might need to use it later just to do some tests as I go along. Alright, so what do I want to do? Well, we're dealing with arithmetic, and what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've made a document that has the operators in it. I've actually got 2 pages here. You have the arithmetic operators and the assignment operators, but I'm looking at the arithmetic operators first with you, and those are the ones that you're used to from your math class growing up as a kid, and they're the simple ones. We're not talking about square root or anything like that. We're talking about plus, minus. This is multiplication. I know you're used to seeing the X or the dot in multiplication. The star is how JavaScript does multiplication, and most programming languages do. Division. This is a /. It's the one that on a typical US keyboard is right near your right shift button. This is modulus. That's modulus is just the word to mean the remainder after you do long division. When you're doing long division with the table math and you end up with, 12 remainder 2, well, modulus is 2 from that. Then you have the increment and decrement operators. Increment is where you perform a +1 on something. So you have a variable and the value is 2, and you go whatever the variable name is. Let's go number is maybe the variable name. So number 1 ++ is incremented from its original value, which was 2, to 3. So now you got number 1 is now equal to 3. So it's kind of like a shortcut for doing number 1 equals number 1 + 1. And I'll show you that in a little closer detail later on. And minus is just the opposite. It decrements, it reduces it by a count of 1. This is something that you commonly have to do while you're looping through things, and loops are also something we're going to cover later. So you'll understand the need for plus plus and minus minus later. For now, what you need to know is that plus plus is called the increment operator and does not require an equal sign. It does arithmetic and assignment at the same time. Decrement is the same thing. It takes a number away and it assigns it to the value at the same time. It's a special operator, and it was designed just to make coding simpler and quicker to write. Alright, so let's just kind of go through a couple of examples. Let's use my function and change my function into an arithmetic function. Instead of alerting each number individually, let's get a result number. And we are going to say number 1 plus number 2. Now what I've done here is I've used the equals assignment operator. Now it's going to be important to pay attention to that single equal sign, because later on in the course, as we're doing some selection logic and conditional stuff like an if statement, we want to know if something is something. We're going to be using equal signs as well, but it's going to be a double equal sign, and it means something different. One sets a value, so it takes anything on the right hand side, whatever the result of the right hand side, and applies it to whatever's on the left hand side. So we've declared a variable, and at the same time we're assigning a value to it. By the way, this could be written as var result. We've now declared result, and we can now say on the next line result equals number plus 2, or sorry, number 1 plus number 2. But we're just trying to get it out of the way in one line so it's a little bit cleaner code. This is something that's very common. You declare and initialize a variable in one line. I recommend doing it in whatever way that your brain best understands it, but you're going to see people doing it in different ways at different times. It's a matter of preference. So even I will try to mix it up and do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. All right, so an arithmetic operator has been used. We are using the addition operator. Because these two are taken out of a text box, these are considered strings right now. So when you add together number 1 and number 2, you're actually going to get 100 concatenated to 200, which is going to be 100200, because they're treated as characters when they're strings. Watch. I'm going to refresh. No, I have to save first. And I have to give them an alert of what the result is. Alert result. So, and in fact, let's have a little bit of fun here. We go number 1 plus, and inside the quotes, the plus is just a character. It's not considered an operator. Number 2 plus equals. So now we're just displaying what it'll end up being. Let's suppose that, let's just substitute. Number 1 is 100 still. So your display will be something like 100 plus 200 equals, now what we want it to be is 300, but I'm just going to put in square brackets result to say that we're going to substitute it with the value of result. And you're going to see right now it's actually 100200 is our value. So I'm going to refresh that. Title shows up. We know we've refreshed. I click my button. You see 100 plus 200 equals 100200, as we expected. Now when you get weird results like that, what's going on? Well, you're concatenating. Your arithmetic needs to happen, so your mathematics, your addition. What you want to do is use the parse that we talked about in, I believe, Intro 2. And I'm just going to open that really quick. Intro 2, you can see over here I used parse float. So we're going to do that again. We're going to use parse float. And I'm just, for the sake of showing you how quick it can be to kind of refer back to your old code and do it again, I'm going to copy and paste that over. And rather than putting it into the same line, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to reassign number 1 by changing it from itself by parsing number 1 from a string and putting it back into the number 1 memory location. So I don't need an extra variable to do a parse on it. I can actually parse it right back into itself. And in fact, that's probably the most efficient way to go about doing it with this one. Now, since those two variable names are so similar to each other, and since the lines of code that we need are so similar, I'm going to copy this line of code and I'm going to paste it in here. And in fact, I can just copy and paste number 2 over number 1. I double click on them to highlight them. And there it is. And Notepad just has a built-in thing that highlights everything that's similar. So when I highlight number 1, all the number 1s gets highlight. When I double click and highlight number 2, all that. If I did it with value would happen. It's just sort of a way of finding quickly what you're looking for in Notepad. Alright, so we've parsed them into floating points. We could have done integers because we have integers here, but what if we put in 100.1, we'd want to be able to parse it out as a float. We can't always tell what the user is going to put in. So I've done that. I've got my alert. I'm making sure that I have parse float there. Alert has told me what's going on with my stuff as I went along. Now I want to double check that my addition is happening properly. So I click OK, and I go 100 plus 200. I know that when I put the 100 plus 200, they're going in to the floating point converter or the parser and coming back out into each other and then being added together as numeric data. So I'm just going to put here, convert to numeric data for arithmetic, which in this case means addition. And copy paste. Comments are always nice, right? They help to further explain your code. Debug is sort of a hint that this is useless. So you know what? We're not going to come back to using that right now. If we do, I'll retype it again. So I'm going to save that. And here we create variable references to the text box objects on our HTML page. And here we're getting the number from the text box object. Alright, then we are converting, which we have over here, and add number 1, add the two variables together. We have converted them to numbers so that plus will mean arithmetic. Alright, so now I think when I add together 100 and 200, I get 300 instead of 100, 200. I'm going to click my button, and out comes 100 plus 200 equals 300. So now we know result is equal to 100, the number, plus 200, the number, not 100 glued to 200 because they're text values. Let's click OK. Now I'm going to add just one more thing into the mix here. I'm going to go input type equals text, and I'm going to add a special property, read only equals read only. This is a flag property. It can be a true or false. Don't worry too much about what that is. Just if you don't want the user to type into it, then this is where you would type that in. I'm going to give it an ID of result 1, sure, and value is going to be I'm going to put NA to start, and it will change as the program runs. So when I hit refresh, I now have a text box here that says NA. If I try to type into it, it doesn't let me do anything. I'm wildly typing at my keyboard right now. You may not be able to hear it, but that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to click my button. 100 plus 200 equals 300. So nothing else has really changed. I've just added that HTML element, but now I want to get a reference to it the same way I did the others. So I know that I get a reference exactly the same way all the way. So I'm going to grab that third text box now, and this is going to be my result box. Now I don't need a 1, but I want to keep it consistent. And then I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go result 1. And in fact, I'm going to copy and paste to make sure that I type that correctly. Okay, now instead of alerting, now when I do my arithmetic, I want to add it and have the result go to the bottom. And actually, if I'm doing math that way, I want to, instead of put my button, I want to say get result, and I'm going to put in brackets plus. Alright, it's called my function. I think we're going to go by and we're going to change, but first let's test it and make sure that it's working correctly. Instead of alerting, we're going to put result box, or put the result into the result box. Now remember, if we go result box equals result, we're putting result into the variable, the memory location result box, which is supposed to be the object. Now what happens in this case is that it actually overwrites the memory location but doesn't have an effect on the HTML page. Watch what happens. I'm going to save it and I'm going to click my button. Oh, I forgot to refresh, sorry. I refreshed, so I have this code running now, and now it says get result plus. When I do that, nothing happens. I didn't expect anything to happen myself, but you may have expected something to happen. That's because I'm replacing the variable incorrectly. What I want to do is affect the value of the text box object. So remember, dot value. When you're putting something into or taking something out of the value of a text box, you have to use that dot value part of it. It's going to be very important throughout the entire course. So I'm going to save that and I'm going to refresh. We know we've refreshed. Now when I click get result, I have to debug the code. Perhaps I have named it incorrectly. Okay, well, let's go back to our alert, make sure that our alert is working correctly. Refresh. Alert, it is working correctly. So I'm going to go result. Oh, you know what? It's because I didn't put the 1 in result box. It should be result box 1 over here. So result box 1.value equals result. And I saved it and I'm going to hit refresh. And then I go get result plus. So I still have the alert because I turned that back on to make sure it was still working. I clicked OK, but you notice that this is now 300. It's also still read only. It's not doing anything there. And that's for adding things together. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to take care of how to, I guess, rename a few things that they're a little easier to understand. And then we're going to go through some of the other operators a little quicker because they don't have the same idiosyncrasies as the addition operator, which is also the concatenation operator.